operation. The purpose of this public hearing is to hear testimony regarding resolution number 240886. Ms. Helen Lawhead, can you please call the roll?
Vice Chair, Councilmember O'Neill. Councilmember Squilla. Councilmember Gautier. Councilmember Jones. Councilmember Young. Councilmember Driscoll. Councilmember Lozada. Councilmember Bass. Councilmember Phillips. Councilmember Gilmore Richardson. Councilmember Thomas. Councilmember Harity. Councilmember Ahmad. Councilmember Landau. Councilmember Brooks. Councilmember O'Rourke. Council President Johnson.
Here. Thank you. A quorum of this committee is present, and this hearing is now called to order. Will the clerk please read the title of the resolution before the committee today?
Resolution 240886, authorizing the Committee on Fiscal Stability and Intergovernmental Cooperation to hold quarterly hearings that include monthly reporting requirements to discuss the fiscal position and overarching social impact goals of the city, including and as related to the 5-year plan, and reporting requirements set forth in the quarterly city manager's report and as submitted to the Pennsylvania Intergovernmental Cooperation Authority.
Thank you very much. Will the clerk please call the first panel?
Yes, Rob DeBoe, Finance Director, and Sabrina Maynard, Budget Director.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Just state your name, just for the record. Please begin your testimony. But good morning, Robin. Good morning, Sabrina.
Good morning, Council President Johnson and members of the committee. I'm Rob DeBoe. I'm the city's finance director. I am joined at the table by Sabrina Maynard, who's the city's budget director. Thanks for the opportunity to update you on the status of our finances. As we'll discuss, we are testifying before you at a time of heightened risk for the city's finances. In addition to the risk, that risk, and to the end of our $1.4 billion in COVID relief funding, we face our legacy challenges of a fund balance that is lower relative to those of peer cities, a pension fund that, while improving in health, is a funding percent that's still in the 60s. We also face high infrastructure costs, high level of fixed costs. We have a high poverty rate that both depresses our revenue base and increases the demand for services. We also face the usual risk of potential economic slowdown. That risk is heightened, however, by the uncertainty around the actions of the federal government. That uncertainty creates multiple threats to the city's finances. Perhaps the largest are the threats to our grants and to our tax base. And to put that in context, in FY24, we received about $2.8 billion in federal grants. The new federal government's review of all grants raises doubts about the timing of receipt of those grants, and in the worst case, could mean some grants might not even be received. And then we've seen in the recently passed budget by the federal House about $880 million in Medicaid costs, which actually obviously will have a really big impact on people's ability to get the medical care that they need. Federal government may also make cuts that will affect what has been kind of the bulwark of our city's tax base: medical institutions, educational institutions, and government. In FY24, education and medical institutions and government accounted for more than $1 billion in wage tax collections. That's almost 45% of our reductions. The federal government has already cut the number of staff employed in Philadelphia, and potential cuts to research funding could lead to additional job cuts. Those job cuts would obviously be reflected in our wage tax collections. Understanding that there are always potential threats to our budget, we've taken steps to guard our fiscal condition. We've built up a fund balance that the recently released quarterly report shows will end this fiscal year at about $580 million. That's about 9% of revenues, which is slightly higher than our internal goal of having a fund balance of between 6 and 8% of revenues, but it's much lower than the roughly 17% recommended by the Government Finance Officers Association. We've also built up a budget stabilization reserve fund, which will add an extra layer of protection for the city. And in the quarterly report that was just released, we added an $80 million reserve against federal policy changes. As we monitor potential threats to our finances, we need to continue providing essential services, improving the city's competitiveness, and making the investments that will make Philadelphia the safest, cleanest, greenest big city in the country with access to economic opportunity for all. The quarterly report shows changes driven by one of those investments as it reflects the increased spending to prepare for the 2026 events that was included in the mid-year transfer ordinance that was voted out of committee last week. The mayor's second budget, which will be released next month, will show additional crucial investments and will continue to balance those investments with the city's long-term fiscal health. That concludes my testimony. We're happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you, Rob, for your testimony. Just a question. So we're seeing a projected fund balance you just talked about in the amount of $584.3 million for FY25.
Yep.
And that's 16 million higher than approved five-year plan and 58 million less than the projected fund balance last quarter.
Correct. Yep.
So talk to us about how the projected fund balance aligns with our goal of being fiscally stable.
Yeah. So we have an internal goal of having a fund balance that's between 6 and 8% of revenues. The fund balance we're projecting is around 9% of revenues. So it's higher than our internal goal. The Government Finance Officers Association, kind of our trade group, recommends that you have a fund balance that's equal to 2 months' worth of revenues, which is about 17%. And that actually is not inconsistent with what other large cities have. For us, we always have to balance that against the need for investments, against our ability, given the high poverty rate here. So we balance where we know we should be according to what the Government Finance Officers Association says versus what we think is reasonable given our needs.
All right, and I remember doing a reading over the five-year plan, and just correct me if I'm wrong, there's a projection of negative job growth that's a part of that particular plan. Are you familiar with that in the five-year plan that we originally?
Yeah, so we base our projections on work with an outside econometric firm, and then they give us recommendations. We test that at a meeting that PICA hosts for us down at the Fed. So we use projections based on that back and forth. And our wage tax is a combination of what we see in job growth and what we see in wages. And there's kind of an interplay. So our econometric firm thought that nationally the job market was getting very tight. And that's why you're seeing some job loss. The flip side of that is then you see larger wage growth than you would if the job growth was stronger. And I should also add that we have the new plan coming out in just 2 weeks, and that will have a new set of projections.
Okay. I just want to get clear. So the firm that we use projected negative job growth throughout the five-year plan.
A couple of years in the last plan, but that may look different in what's coming up in a couple of weeks.
Okay. So the one that's coming out will probably have a whole different outlook, differently.
An updated outlook, yes.
Because things are changing as we move forward.
Exactly,
okay.
yes.
And I only asked that question because I remember going over the five-year plan and then also looking at the negative job growth assumption, and then how are we figuring out to create job growth. If we know going down the next few years it's going to be negative, our strategy actually to grow.
That's right, and that's
as a means to address poverty.
Yep, and that's always our goal too, is to see jobs grow.
Do we anticipate? I know we just did a transfer ordinance, $45 million to the various groups that are going to be supporting the celebration of the 250th year of our country. Do we take in consideration that during that celebration, any job growth during that period, because we're investing so much city dollars in promotion?
So our econometric firm kind of looks at all of that as they do their projections. They'll look at something like that and say, okay, that might have a positive impact.
I mean us as a city, I'm sorry, not the outside firm.
Well, we base our projections on what the outside firm gives us.
Okay.
So they will take that information into account when they do when they come up with their suggestions that they then show to us, and then that we then value test down at the Fed.
All right. The city's FY24 fund balance was $942.9 million, which was $414.2 million higher than the adopted budget. The fiscal year prior to the city's FY23 fund balance was $981.6 million, which was over $600 million higher than the adopted budget. What were the major drivers behind the higher than expected fund balances to have those trends continue this year?
Yeah, so one of the biggest things that's been driving our fund balance has been our challenge with hiring people. So we have usually big underspends in our class 100. We've put a large emphasis on trying to increase the number of positions that are filled. So we're starting to see some of that turnaround. There are some departments, like L&I, for example, they've been able to hire more inspectors, or the law department has been able to hire more lawyers. HR has been able to hire more people. So we're starting to see some improvement there, which we're hoping will then cut into that underspend, because while that underspend winds up helping our fund balance, we actually want to fill those positions and want to provide the services. So that's been the biggest single driver of the increase in our fund balance. We also have a business tax that's particularly hard to project because it doesn't come in until the end of April, so it usually comes in after we've finished our budget. And for the last couple of years, it's come in higher than we anticipated, so that's been a help too.
So you said the business tax has been coming in
Last couple of years, it came in higher than
normal?
Yeah.
Okay. The report also shows a projected increase of $12 million in revenue from last quarter. Can you provide more context for why these revenues performed better than expected, particularly what we just talked about, real estate transfer tax?
Yep. So the transfer tax had really rapid growth before the years of the pandemic. And then for a couple of reasons, including changes in the market, like increases in interest rates, and the changes that we all made in the abatement, there was a kind of downturn in the number of transactions. That has started to moderate a little. So that's meant that there have been more transactions, and real estate transfer has been a little better than we thought it would, which is a good indication that there's been activity in the real estate market.
Do you think based upon those changes, the changes in the abatement had a chilling effect on the market?
No, I think what happened is there was a rush to market before the change in the abatement. And so because there was that rush, a lot of activity that would have happened over the next year or two
Happened early
moved
on?
up, yes.
Okay, because I do know everybody did a rush to pull those permits.
Yeah,
Kind of crashed the system early on.
yes.
Okay, and then
I think the thing that had the bigger impact on the market was the jump in interest rates.
so with the jump, okay, all right. Give us an idea in terms of our economic climate. How are we doing compared to other major cities right now? I mean, we got the title of being the largest poorest city in America. However, we're doing some things to move the city of Philadelphia forward. How do we fare
So,
economically?
yeah, so I think we still, if you're talking about the poverty rate, we're still high compared to the other top 10 cities. On the other hand, our poverty rate has been coming down steadily, and is the lowest it's been in a while. And obviously, we all agree there's a lot more we want to do. We have started to see some movement in the right direction there.
The chair recognizes Councilmember Kathy Gilmore Richardson.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you very much both to Rob and Sabrina for all of your work over the last several weeks. I wanted to start here, and I can circle back, obviously, but I wanted to talk about some of the sort of overarching things that were notated in the QCMR, and I wanted to go back to the question specifically that Mr. President asked around the higher than anticipated fund balance. And you know that this typically happens each year. And I think, and we know that staffing assumptions are a big part of this, right?
Yep.
Particularly in the public safety portfolio. So I wanted to ask the question in advance of budget around the staffing assumptions and if you are realistically placing the vacancy rate in the budget in advance so that we have a more realistic picture of where we'll be at the end of the fiscal year and then for each fiscal year moving forward.
Yes, so we are, and we have been, and will continue, but we're increasing the vacancy rate to kind of acknowledge that positions won't be filled. So yes, we're doing that. In the longer term, what we really want to do is kind of peel back on the number of positions that we're showing, acknowledging that they won't be filled, and then you'll see the vacancy rate come down, and the budget will reflect more like what's likely to happen.
Can you speak to specifically the public safety portfolio? Because obviously we know that we have a lot of overtime. There have been a number of things happening. As the mayor stated, our Black Swan event in the Northeast, which our public safety professionals were just stellar in responding to, but because we know we're so short-staffed, logged a lot of overtime. Same thing, thankfully, for the Eagles Parade, and a few other things that have happened over the last several months. And so I asked specifically about the public safety portfolio because even if you look at PPD, we know that there's at least, we're off by at least from filled positions to budgeted positions, about 1,400 vacancies. We know we can't fill 1,400 positions in a year. So the question remains is how are we looking at vacancies with a real lens so that we understand what our fund balance will truly be? We don't have the wiggle room of the federal money anymore. So I know you all typically go to departments and ask about the vacancy rates and sort of what they believe they are able to do for the year. But what are you all doing specifically in that public safety portfolio so that we know we're accounting for what we could actually do? Because I don't know that, we don't know what we don't know right now about what will happen moving forward.
Yeah. So a few things to say on that. One,
Thank you.
That the hiring challenge of public safety is a national issue, not specific to here.
Right.
We have been trying to take actions to address it with things like hiring and retention bonuses and kind of looking at things in prisons, for example, that would help attract people. But with that said, right, there are still a number of vacancies. We've gotten to the point, at least with police, where we're not losing ground anymore. We're at least kind of staying steady. But you'll see in the budget that there is a healthy, upcoming budget, that there is a healthy vacancy allowance. And,
Right.
And that's, there's not enough funding in the budget to actually fund the positions that we show because we're assuming that they will be vacant for portions of the year. And that's really the kind of the way we handle it now.
So I guess my request and my ask would be if we could have an actual real picture for the upcoming budget for this
Understood.
year,
Yeah.
so that we know what to anticipate, okay? Because I think that'll help us be able to look at the budget differently and understand what we really need to do, okay?
Understood, yep.
I read the QCMR when we first received the information. And I wanted to talk about, and are you prepared to talk about the next mid-year?
The next
I
mid-year?
think I saw it's around at 225 million in new spending.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, so the biggest, big portions of that are that Federal Reserve that we talked about, and increasing that as kind of a safety measure against what we're seeing. Can you identify yourself?
Yep. Hi, Sabrina Maynard, Budget Director. So there are a couple of other items in there. So that includes, sorry. it's
Because
on-
that was only about a third of the money, right?
Yep, so there are a couple of other items in there as well. They're, just at the top of my head, I can go back and pull some wellness investments. We had put in some, thinking about doing PAYGO for the remainder of the phase of the wellness project that had been unveiled in January. I know we took care of the law piece and the 2026 piece in the mid-year from last week. Go back, sorry.
And then while you're looking, so I don't use up all of my time, my last question will be specifically on page 23 of the QCMR around purchase of services analysis for selected departments
Yes.
in the general fund, under managing director. So you've listed CPOC, Defender, Public Safety, and then that's all other departments from the managing director's office. Is that correct, with the 41 million?
41 million versus the budget, yes.
And that's all under just managing director? Is that and that's not including public safety, correct?
That's not including the new public safety office, that's right.
Right, right. And could you just talk about that a bit while Sabrina's looking for the last answer? Bless you.
Yeah. This change was- Is that one?
It's predominantly PAYGO. Yep, so the managing director piece is largely, I think it's predominantly wellness-related costs. So I think there's an operating component, about 35 million, and a PAYGO component of about 30 million. And then
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last.
Sorry, PAYGO, Pay-As-You-Go Capital for
PAYGO.
the Riverview facility.
PAYGO.
Yep,
Okay.
yep.
Just a point of information, can you just clarify that it's the pay-as-you-go you said, correct?
Yep, so that means we're not borrowing for those costs. That's just
No, I-
transferring from
no,
operating over to
No,
capital.
I know what pay-as-you-go
Okay.
means, but I just want to get an idea in terms of the operation funding for the wellness center. Are they contracts that we're going to be using, or is this in-house?
It's a number of contracts.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. President. And,
Yes,
did I
sorry,
cover
so there are a number of items in there. We took care, so there are a couple of departments where, kind of to what Rob was speaking about earlier, we are seeing higher, we're actually seeing people be retained and positions be filled, and so that's concentrated in a couple of places. We are seeing higher overtime in fire, so that's a piece of that. Sustainability, the law department, the district attorney's office, a couple of places where we are making adjustments there. The other adjustment in the transfer ordinance is moving the funding from the labor reserve out to the departments that had collective bargaining agreements, so making sure that those go out to the departments that will need them. We also are proposing making making an investment in the prisons for a number of items that we know we need for the litigation. So building maintenance, body cameras, continuing the lock project to replace locks, air conditioning, training, and some other programming and investments. Those are some of the big items.
okay, great. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Mr. President.
You're welcome. I just want to ask a question before I call on the next member regarding the projected increase in the general fund balance obligations is $295 million more than budgeted, roughly $300 million more than what's budgeted. And so I just want to get an idea of what's driving that increase.
So the biggest single thing is the reserve we put in against federal funding, $80 million. But there's also the money that we put in for 2026, the increase in indemnities costs that was also
Separate from the mid-year, or the mid-year is
that was
part
in
of
the
that
mid-year.
number?
So both of those
Okay.
things from the mid-year also added to our cost. Some of the things that Sabrina was just talking about with prisons, some of the wellness investment, and then the smaller things in other departments that are actually hiring people.
In 2026.
It's 2026, okay. And then the last thing before I call on my next member, do you have an update on the following in terms of spending? I know we did $100 million investment to build a wellness ecosystem, and so we saw the results of that. $10 million to support workforce development, employee partnerships that include commitments to employment, another $130 million to expand PHL taking care of business, $500 million for street repaving, $18 million for citywide residential cleaning program, and $12.3 million, which I'm a beneficiary of twice weekly trash collection. Do you have an idea of how much you spent totally in each of those categories?
Yeah, we can get you that. Some of that are multi-year numbers, so but we'll get you that, and we can get you a breakout on those items.
Thank you very much. The chair recognizes Councilman Curtis Jones.
Thank you, Mr. President.
You're welcome.
Couple of quick questions, and good afternoon.
Afternoon.
How does this surplus rank over the past 8 years by way of amount? Is it the largest?
So 2 years ago was the largest. We were up in the high nines. What we're projecting now is about 580, so it's lower than it's been the last couple of years, but still higher than our internal goal.
Out of the taxes that we receive, there are 7 taxes, correct? Major taxes.
Yeah, there are a lot of but yeah, sure, yes.
Say it again?
Roughly.
Roughly, okay. Of which the business tax represents about 70% of our city's revenue, is that correct?
So if you count the wage taxes, business tax, yes.
What percentage does real estate taxes?
So real estate tax, we can actually do that. So our total taxes are about $5 billion, I think. And let's find the real estate tax number. So total taxes we're projecting actually at 4.3 million. And-
4.3
Yeah.
million?
Billion.
Billion.
Sorry, if it was million, then we'd have a lot bigger problems than we're talking about today. Let me just find the wage. Okay, and then the property tax is about 900 million, so about 20%-ish. It's a bigger percent for the school district, but for us, it's a little below 20%.
What is our taxable total properties for the city of Philadelphia? What is the amount now?
I have to get back to you on that exact number.
Real estate that we can levy a tax?
Yeah, the taxable real estate, we can get you that. I don't have it on the top of my head, but I can get you that.
What was it from your last recollection?
I don't know I know amounts that we collect. I don't have the total assessed value here.
It's my understanding it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 168?
That sounds right, yes.
168 billion?
Billion, yes.
Which I would say is probably the largest taxable amount in our history.
Yeah, we also, until 2013, we based assessments on a fractional assessment, so we were showing assessed values at like a third of their value. So making that change made the assessed value immediately tripled. but then the market has been strong since 2013. So yeah, values have been going up.
So because of AVI, we have seen the largest amount of increase in taxable properties in the city's history, correct?
Yeah, it's a combination of AVI and the strength of the market.
Yeah. All right, that's fair. So my question becomes, we used to get annual requests to adjust the millage rate. You guys would come to us and say, we need X amount of millage rate adjustment in order to get this amount of revenue coming into our coffers so that we can operate the government, correct?
So there were very few millage rate changes. I can think of maybe only a couple of years where there were millage rate changes. So that didn't happen a lot for the general fund.
So what I'm asking, I guess, is that is it time that we, based on AVI and the increase in value and the market rate, because I know the tax report came back saying eliminate the BERT, let's take care of big businesses. Isn't it time to give the little guy a break?
Yep, so the way we've been doing that is through relief measures. So for last year, for example, we put in that low-income freeze on the property tax so that your property tax won't increase if you meet if you meet the guidelines. We've increased the homestead so that homeowners see reduced value, and because of the way we've increased it, it's a particularly beneficial impact for low-valued houses. We have the LOOP program. We have payments, the UPA programs. We have a really wide array of...
I'm familiar with UPA, LUPA, and all of that. The question becomes for me, have those programs not outpaced the value that we are receiving based on AVI and based on market rate? And is it time for a millage adjustment downward to help out people who own real estate in our communities? And I say all of that to say, Rob, that I put in a bill to look at neutralization of that amount to kind of evaluate where we are, evaluate how much we take in, and whether or not, in lieu of the fact that we're doing all this for businesses, isn't it time that we take a hard look at reducing the burden of property owners in Philadelphia? And that's a trick question.
Yeah, so, but really it's really a question of approach, right? Because what we've been doing over time is taking a targeted approach to help people, and you're asking, should we look at a more generalized approach, helping kind of everybody, or is the targeted approach better? And I think that's a good discussion to have during the budget process.
I think that's an accurate assessment.
I like your use of assessment there.
Yeah, so I put in, play on words. I have put in that bill, Mr. President, for us to take a look at, or a resolution, and we'll be submitting a subsequent bill because we are able to do that. But do we regularly do that is my question. And in areas that you have protected in South Philly and we have protected citywide, with the reality of AVI, some places have disproportionately been over-assessed. And I've had individuals come into my office and say that we have appraised the property at, let's say, $200,000. But the reality is they couldn't get $150,000 for it in the real world. And therefore, they are out of sync, out of loop with reality. And so what I'd like us to do is take a hard look at that population, although it only represents 20% of our budget, but to homeowners, it is everything. And so with that, I would like us to take a hard look at when is it time to give the little person a break and not just big business. Thank you, Mr. President.
You're welcome. The chair recognizes Councilmember Jim Harrigan.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon.
Hello.
Looks like everybody's sleeping here. I gotta get it a little livelier. Rob, I just got a couple of questions. But one, I don't usually feed into rumors, but this one disturbed me. So I figured let me ask, even if it just turns out to be false. Are we allowed to spend the soda tax money, or is it being held up in escrow? I was told, the rumor was that the money that's going from the soda tax is right now held up in escrow because of some court battles or something that are going on.
No, when the soda tax was first implemented, there were court battles, and it wasn't imposed. But then those battles, we won those battles.
Good. All right.
So that money is flowing.
Good. All right. Then
being spent.
to my next question, which is, what is the total revenue a year from the soda tax?
It is this year projected at 66 million-ish.
What is it? I'm sorry?
It's projected about 65.7, I think.
65.7 million is projected at?
Yes.
Okay. How much of that goes to the daycare, childcare?
So we have actually, it is divided between that and debt service on rebuild.
Rebuild, right.
We can get you that, that split.
And
We're
that's-
actually at the point where the cost of the programs and the debt service is more than what we bring in the beverage tax, so
Okay,
it's supplemented by the general
how
fund.
about this?
Yeah.
Is it around 10 million for daycare? Is that number?
For pre-K, I think it's
Pre-K.
more than that.
It's more than
But,
that?
yeah.
What would you think? Anywhere around?
I don't want to guess, but I think it's.
Okay, well, you'll get me
Yeah.
those numbers, and you'll get me the numbers of how much goes to rebuild. And I brought up another question. So, rebuild, you just said that we are paying off loans for rebuild. Is that with that money? Is that?
Yes, so rebuild is funded by borrowings, and then the debt service of that borrowing
So we're borrowing money to pay for something, right?
pay for
But the
projects.
money's supposed to be there, so why are we borrowing money to do the projects if $66.6 million is going in there every year? I don't understand why we're not just paying for these projects instead of also paying interest on these projects.
Yeah.
That's my,
So the cost of the projects is, and this is rounding, and it's changing, is let's say $300 million. And in order to fund that up front, we borrowed, so we'd get money that we could then use to make investments in recreation facilities, libraries.
so essentially
and that-
spending money that we didn't have yet.
Well, no, we borrowed, and the reason you borrow for something, the same like getting a mortgage on your house, because you're going to be using that facility for 20, 30 years. So there's a rationale to be paying debt service while you're getting the benefit of that. You wouldn't borrow for operations. You wouldn't
Right.
borrow for daycare, for example, because that's something you're using up that year. It's gone. But you would.
My thing is about the fiscal responsibility of it. If we have money to build, let's build. But to take a loan to pay for something that the money's supposed to be there for, that's where my disconnect is.
There's not enough money that comes in from the beverage tax to pay for each year to pay for all of the facilities. There is enough money to help us pay the debt service over time. We would not have been able to make the investment that we made in facilities just by using beverage tax money as it came in. And we get the benefit from these facilities over time. So it makes sense financially.
Okay, I mean, makes sense to you. Doesn't really make much sense to me. But
Well, it also, we have capital guidelines that we base on what industry standards are for what it makes sense to borrow for and what it doesn't, and we follow those.
okay, I guess I'll be happy with that. Okay, I'll do some more investigating.
And happy to talk to you about it anytime.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I always, money man.
Thank you very much, member. I just had another question in regards to, let's go back to the millage rate that
Okay.
Councilman Curtis Jones was talking about. and obviously want to make sure that we're providing relief for homeowners. You talked about a targeted approach versus a general approach. Give me an idea between the difference in the approach.
Yeah, so targeted approach is doing things like the low-income freeze that we did, or the senior freeze, or homestead, which just helps people on the residential side. If you just lower the millage, because of the way state law works, you can't, for example, lower the millage on the residential side. You lower it for everybody. So
even the rich folks get a break as well.
Businesses.
Everybody.
Yes, everybody.
So your targeted approach is because you want to focus on those most in need?
Yeah, that's right.
Follow-up question. It's like third rail, but I'm still going to ask it. Have we ever explored pilots, right, because we're talking about real estate and taxable real estate, right? And this came up in part of a conversation yesterday with some tax reform members, just having the general conversations where you have certain institutions may have millions in property, right? Millions and millions in property, but they're not being taxed. But yet, CEO may make 8 figures, so to speak, I guess 7 figures, right? And they may be pretty well off as a nonprofit with property and land. Have we ever explored like maybe certain thresholds?
So there was a time when there were pilots from those institutions. There are pilots we get related to like specific projects. We don't receive pilot payments now from those institutions.
Have we explored it as a revenue capture?
I think there have over the years been ongoing discussions, so I think, yes, it's been explored over time.
Councilmember Phillips, thank you, Rob.
Thank you, Council President. Rob, I just have a question on what council can do to help in this situation. So there's high fixed costs, including like debt service, continue to be a challenge. Are there any strategies in place to restructure, reduce these costs without compromising essential services? And also, is there anything that we as city council members can do to help in this regard with you?
So on the debt service side, one of the things that we do all the time is look to see whether there are opportunities to refund our debt, the way you refinance a mortgage, to see whether we can lower our costs. That's a little more challenging now that interest rates have gone up, but we still look at that. Also, we talked a little before about doing things like do pay-as-you-go financing for capital. That really helps us in terms of reducing how much we have to borrow. So those things help with fixed costs. I think in terms of what council can do, and there's a lot of what council already does, which is kind of be thought partners with us as we kind of go through what we're going through, particularly with the uncertainty that we're facing.
Did you say thought partners?
Thought partners, yes, work together.
Okay. Thought partners.
I think, my initial instinct was to say,
what I was thinking.
my initial instinct was to say, just pass whatever budget we send over. That would be helpful. But I thought that.
I was going to say that. I was like,
Member Phillips, you said thought partners.
Thought partners. But see, that's why I said, I only mention that because, all while, being fiscally responsible is important. We absolutely do that. That's our responsibility. We still have a lot of concerns that take place in the city. And, our residents are, still going to want to see action. So that was important. And lastly, what are I'm not sure if you talked about this deeply, but are there any alternatives to the federal cuts that are going to, impact the city that we can turn to in terms of foundations or any other private investments beyond?
Yeah, I think, yes, we need to look for, anything we can, like philanthropy or whether there's any ability at the state. But I think the scale of what we could face the federal government probably far outweighs anything that we could get there. So I think one of the key things is to, try to work with our delegation to make sure that the worst doesn't happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just from your standpoint, we want to balance long-term financial health, as I mentioned earlier, yet we still need to improve public services and economic opportunity. Where do you see our city going with our public services and economic opportunity with all these potential changes that are happening?
Yeah, I mean, I think we still have to make the crucial investments. We still have to make sure, we've been seeing increases in public safety. We have to make sure that continues. We've been seeing the city get cleaner. We have to make sure that continues, to continue to look for ways to increase economic opportunity. I think it's what you're saying. We have to make sure all of that still happens in the face of the uncertainty we're facing.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. And I have my last question, and then we'll bring up Marissa Waxman from PICA. Have we, Rob, done an internal analysis for efficiencies in terms of just how we spend money as a government? Like, not an outside person such as the controller, but within our own purview of the administration, just to kind of look at how we go about spending our dollars, to save dollars.
Yep, and it's an ongoing thing. Everything from like looking at what people buy for events, like we're not buying 100 pineapples, for example, or everything is kind of done responsibly. Part of our budget review is kind of working through with every department, looking at how they spend their money and make sure that it makes sense. So it's an ongoing process. So I think the answer is yes, we do that.
Thank you.
One of the things, through the
Go ahead,
budget
Sabrina.
through the budget process, we find economies of scale sometimes. So we find like multiple departments will maybe be working on communications or what have you, and we are in a position to make those connections on behalf of folks, and so that's one of the things we look for.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you. Any other questions from members? Oh, Councilman Catherine Gilmore Richardson, Majority Leader.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. President. I apologize, I wanted to come back around, be mindful and thoughtful of my colleagues. But one thing I wanted to talk about that we've noticed, and particularly with the increase of some of the spending that we've had to do this year for obvious reasons, is that our spending continues to outpace our collection. And we know that that's not a sustainable practice forever going forward. And so I heard the president talk about how you all are looking for cost-saving measures internally. But I wanted to go back to something that was brought up in the past administration, something that I think Montgomery County was able to do very well. You know where I'm going with this. And you all have implemented program-based budgeting, right? But have not really achieved real savings as a result of that implementation. So is there any thinking around implementing a zero-based budgeting model for the city that we kind of start from zero, start from scratch, to try to get us in a better place around spending? Because, I mean, it's like you said, it's like having your own house. If I only have $10,000 a month and I'm spending 12, I'm short 2 every month. And so what are we doing about that?
So I do think that our budgeting process, the performance-based budget, does give us a good idea of what we get for what we spend and whether that investment makes sense. I think zero-based budgeting I think we would need to significantly ramp up our administrative capabilities to do that.
Right, and I brought this up in the past.
Yeah.
But I think over time, we are spending much more than what we have in previous years. And we know the staffing allowances and the vacancies that we have, and then the need to address overtime and all of those things. But with the real realities that we face over the next 3 to 4 years, I think it's incumbent upon us to do all that we can to reduce the overspending so that we're in a better space.
And I think that is something we can do given the budget process we use now.
Okay, and then if you could give me a written response on what it would take to move us from our current budgeting model to a complete zero-based budgeting model for the city, that would be helpful. And what it would take from a staffing perspective, so that we could see that if from a staffing perspective, it even has a return on investment.
Yes, and even whether we'd have the ability to hire that many people.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you, Majority Leader. The chair recognizes Councilman Ketty Lozada.
I just have one really quick question, and I'm responding to some of the concerns that we are experiencing in the district as it relates to some of our, I guess, water infrastructure or the pipes in the city of Philadelphia. I have in my district alone about 10 to 15 sinkholes. And so considering that some of the infrastructure in the city is so antiquated, are we prepared to respond to the growing number of sinkholes that we're seeing in I'm sure it's not just in the Center Council District, but across the city of Philadelphia, understanding that some of that money comes from the federal government? Are we prepared to respond to some of those issues that we're going to see over not just the winter months, but of course entering into the summer? Are we prepared for that?
Yeah, and so, water has substantial capital investments that they have planned over time. I do think that there are some federal matches for that. So I think that is probably one of the uncertainties we face, is what that federal funding looks like going forward. I agree with you, it's really important to be able to make that investment and to try to avoid having what's happening with sinkholes.
How much is budgeted for that right now?
I'd have to get back to you. I have to kind of talk to water about, but it's a substantial amount.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Member Lozada. Are there any other questions for this panel? Thank you very much for your time, Rob and Sabrina. Thank you very much. Will the clerk please call the next panelist?
Marissa Waxman, Executive Director of PICA.
Welcome back, Marissa.
Thank you.
Just state your name and title for the record, and please begin your testimony.
Great. Good afternoon, Council President Johnson and members of the Council's Committee on Fiscal Stability and Intergovernmental Cooperation. My name is Marissa Gorin-Waxman. I'm the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Intergovernmental Cooperation Authority, also known as PICA. PICA is grateful to this committee for convening today to provide an opportunity to highlight the need for the city to maintain and enhance its financial condition. As you know, this is why PICA exists. In the early 1990s, the city of Philadelphia was on the brink of bankruptcy. Revenues fell short of projections, the city didn't have cash to pay for its operations, and no one would lend it any money. Local and state level stakeholders rallied and cooperated to address the fiscal crisis, and the Pennsylvania legislature passed the PICA Act to bolster Philadelphia's fiscal condition and restore access to capital markets. The passage of the PICA Act also created PICA as an independent state authority with a bipartisan board that assists Philadelphia in solving financial and budgetary problems and helping it achieve and maintain access to capital markets. Today, a large part of PICA's work is reviewing and approving the city's 5-year financial plan and monitoring the city's finances to ensure that the city sticks to that plan. This cooperative approach has been working. Revenues have increased, improved fiscal and budgetary practices have been put into place, the city's bond ratings have improved, and fund balances have generally grown. But ongoing fiscal stability is not ensured. Local decisions, changes in the economy, and policy choices at other levels of government can either improve or undercut the city's fiscal condition. It's important to remember that we don't just want fiscal stability to get a good bond rating or an award from the Government Finance Officers Association. Maintaining and enhancing our fiscal condition means that Philadelphia can predictably provide critical services to residents, be ready for the unexpected, whether it's a mega snowstorm or a Super Bowl parade, and avoid overburdening its taxpayers at the same time. PICA is the city's fiscal lifeguard. If the city is in real fiscal distress, we dive into the pool and use all of the tools at our disposal to ensure the city doesn't go under. Much of the time when things are going well financially, we're just watchful. scanning the pool for potential danger, either from outside, like an oncoming storm, or from within the pool, like imbalanced pool chemicals or horseplay that could turn dangerous. We issue reminders to brush up on your breaststroke, have flotation devices available, and be aware of upcoming weather conditions. Over the past month, there have been announced changes from the federal government that may have a material impact on the City of Philadelphia's finances. Changes to the nature and level of federal grants directly to the city may have an impact on service delivery and infrastructure investments. Changes in grants to organizations and institutions across our region may also impact social services, cultural offerings, and more. Loss of jobs at those organizations or Philadelphia-based federal employees would have a negative impact on Philadelphia's tax collections. Policy changes related to tariffs could raise costs for items that the city purchases, requiring more funds or scaled-back projects. Many of the proposed changes are not entirely clear or face legal challenges, and this creates fiscal uncertainty as the city manages its current year budget and develops the FY 26 to 30 plan. PICA uses a group of 9 indicators to monitor the city's fiscal condition. Although a single data point can reveal if a city is in distress, like a negative fund balance, assessing relative fiscal health and Philadelphia's trajectory requires more varied inputs. These indicators are grouped in 5 categories: debt, fiscal management, pension, reserves, and revenues. While for most of the indicators, there are not specific targets or thresholds that are legally mandated or universally identified as correct, PICA has identified thresholds to categorize whether the city's performance raises minimal, moderate, or significant concern. As PICA's entire reason for existing is to maintain and enhance the city's fiscal stability, we'll always have at least minimal concern about any indicator. When PICA reviewed the FY 25 to 29 plan last summer, it had minimal concerns about 3 of the measures: the city's credit rating, wage tax collections as a % of estimates, and the change in tax and local government non-tax revenue collections. PICA had moderate concern about 1 indicator related to debt, long-term obligations as a share of general fund spending. There were 5 measures, however, at levels raising significant concerns for Philadelphia's financial health. That was the operating surplus or deficit as a % of revenues, the % of the pension funded, the change in fund balance as a % of revenues, and total reserves for unanticipated conditions. The city's FY 25 Q2 Quarterly City Managers Report released on February 18th offers more recent data for some of the fiscal indicators in FY 25. The city's updated projections show a significantly larger operating deficit in FY 25 than presented in the FY 25 to 29 plan. The Q2 QCMR shows a small reduction in revenues and a large increase in spending. Initially, the city planned to spend $96 million more than it collected in FY 25, but that has been updated to $395 million. While this is possible due to the larger than projected FY 24 fund balance, the city cannot spend more than it collects indefinitely. The city's Q2 projections show a small increase in fund balance over the adopted 5-year plan, with an additional $16 million, raising the expected FY 25 fund balance to $584 million. This is a small positive step, but the level of fund balance remains well below recommended levels. And given that the FY 24 fund balance was significantly higher than presented than the FY 25 to 29 plan, there's now a larger percentage decline from the prior year to the next. Ideally, fund balances would grow each year, at least until the city can achieve more reasonable levels of reserves. The city has made tremendous improvements in its fiscal condition since the crisis that precipitated the creation of PICA in the early 1990s. In the past 5 years, the city's had notable successes, including navigating the economic and operational challenges of a global pandemic while maintaining positive fund balances, achieving its highest credit rating in more than 4 decades, depositing funds in the budget stabilization reserve for the first time and making subsequent deposits, progressing towards a fully funded pension fund, and making the final payment on the PICA bonds. PICA recognizes and celebrates these achievements and commends successive mayors and city leadership, city employees, city council, city unions, pension board members, and many other stakeholders for this progress. But PICA simultaneously continues to have concerns about the city's fiscal stability. Looking ahead, PICA recommends that the city sustain and expand its efforts to maintain and enhance its fiscal condition by allocating additional resources for expected and unexpected circumstances. With uncertainty coming from federal funding and policy changes, upcoming labor contracts, continued community needs, and other potential challenges, planning for reserves is a prudent step to avoid future fiscal crises. Setting aside more reserves, whether in fund balance, the budget stabilization reserve, or other reserves, is not without drawbacks. There are trade-offs with other policy priorities, and estimating the correct amount of needed reserves can be challenging. but there are many benefits as well, including less need to reduce spending and services when a crisis hits, and potential for improved credit ratings and lower borrowing costs. Improving development of detailed and accurate budgets for planned initiatives is recommended as well. Launching new initiatives and expanding services absent comprehensive budgets may expose the city to cost overruns and budget shortfalls. Since the budget was adopted, the city's financial reports indicate the need for significant resources for programs underway that haven't been approved by City Council. For example, the most recent quarterly city manager's report indicates the need for an additional $7.7 million for expanded fire services, and the report from the first quarter outlined the need for tens of millions of more for contracts for the new wellness centers that had not yet been legislated and aren't reflected in the city's approved FY 25-29 plan. PICA also recommends continuing the commitment to achieving 100% funding for the pension fund by 2033. If the city stays the course as planned and the pension fund is 100% funded by FY 33, the city's normal costs will be less than $200 million annually, rather than the nearly $900 million we are paying now each year. At that point, the city will have the flexibility to set aside funds for incremental adjustments to improve the health and safety of the pension fund, while also freeing up hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue previously dedicated to fixed costs for other priorities. PICA is pleased to continue its support for the City of Philadelphia's financial health and is grateful for the ongoing cooperative relationship with the administration. And as City Council gears up to consider the FY26 budget and the FY26 to 35-year plan, PICA remains, as Rob suggests, another thought partner and a resource for thinking about the impacts of Philadelphia's fiscal stability. And please remember to sign up for our e-newsletter and follow us on LinkedIn to stay up to date on our monitoring and analysis of the City of Philadelphia's fiscal condition. Happy to answer any questions you have, and thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you answered a couple of my questions in your summary. I want to get an idea of, and you pretty much summarized our overall health, right? I think right now you said we're spending more than we're actually collecting, and so we have to stabilize it as we move forward. I'm going to do this. Councilmember Kathy Gilmore Richardson.
Thank you. Thank you, Council President. And thank you, Marissa. It's so good to see you, and thank you for all of your help over the years. I wanted to go to the part of your testimony where you concentrated on the total reserves for unanticipated conditions. And you talked about PICA setting additional benchmarks for the city relative to the total reserves. And so could you just talk about that a bit more? You know that we work together so that we can increase the contributions going to the budget stabilization reserve, particularly after COVID. That was a very glaring experience to go through together. So if you could talk about those higher benchmarks. You heard the administration talk about the Federal Reserve and the money that was set aside in the most recent mid-year. And so in light of that updated information, can you talk about what you all are thinking about for the total reserves?
Certainly. I'll start, and thank you, Council Member, by noting that the PICA Act, the state legislation, only requires the city to have a positive fund balance in order for the PICA board to approve the plan.
Right.
So when we're looking to approve the plan, if they've got 67 cents, less than the price of a pineapple, whatever it is, that's enough to get PICA's approval. That said, we make recommendations to go higher. The Government Finance Officers Association recommends 17%.
Right.
And PICA, doesn't particularly care that it be definitely all in fund balance or all in the budget stabilization reserve or all in a new federal grants reserve. It's about looking holistically that do we have about 2 months worth of revenues or 2 months worth of savings? Because if there's a problem and it's a little bit of a wobble, it can cover it. But really what that level buys us is time to make good, smart, strategic decisions if the scale of the problem is huge, like the loss of all federal funds. We're not going to be able to build up in the near term a $2.8 billion reserve.
Right.
But having that 17%, 2 months worth of spending, buys us time to be thoughtful and make good decisions.
Okay, thank you for that. I wanted to make sure I put that on the record. Knowing that, and I think your testimony talked about this around the spending, okay? Could you talk about sort of some of the recommendations that the PICA board is giving to the city specifically, because you talked about, having to have the positive fund balance no matter what. But when spending outpaces your revenue collection, at some point, the buck is going to stop. And so what has been the recommendation from PICA to the city?
Our clearest recommendation is to get to the point when you're doing a 5-year plan to get to structural balance, where your revenues each year can more than cover your expenses. And so that's what we would like to be seeing in the out years of the plan, that, Philadelphia has been able to do it in certain years, but projects doing forward. I think that it would be smart, sound fiscal and budgetary practice to develop budgets that expect to be, have structural balance to them and not rely on fund balance, because at some point those won't be there.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Leader. Marissa, what specific areas do you believe council should be paying close attention to in terms of our city's fiscal health?
Well, I think all of them, obviously, and I know
Yes.
that you are, and we appreciate this hearing today. But I think it's sort of stepping through the basics. One, looking on the revenue side, making sure we understand that our where we're getting funding from and our expectations match up to reality. Luckily, we found that Philadelphia has a really good track record there, but keeping the eye on the ball that the revenue projections are realistic. Once we get to the spending side, it's thinking about things like all of those fixed costs. What can we do? It's a lot of those you can't change in 1 year, but making the progress on the pension fund, being thoughtful about debt issuance and balancing that with pay-as-you-go financing is really important to make sure that we are not locking ourselves into payments and pushing those forward on folks so that there's no flexibility. Really on the spending side, it's about maintaining a level of flexibility so that we can make decisions for what the needs are. And then we're PICA. The key thing we care about is maintaining and planning for positive fund balances, just so that there's a cushion, so that if something unexpected happens, there's the flexibility to make different decisions and the time to make them. We've seen in the city the past year a number of organizations go away, BDT, University of the Arts, that seem not to have time to make different decisions. And that's really what having adequate reserves is about, is either being able to sort of bridge over a minor thing or being able to pivot and make decisions. And so building flexibility into our financial plans, I think, is really key.
Can you highlight any particular revenue streams or expenditure categories that are showing concerning trends compared to our projections?
So obviously, as both the finance director and I raised today, and everyone is thinking about, the federal funds is a significant concern, as well as the tax revenue streams that are dependent on those. So coming from our meds and eds, we have always been a city almost insulated from certain economic changes and trends because of our concentration in the meds and eds, that their funding wasn't as based on sort of the economy day-to-day, ups and downs of the stock market. But right now, they really may be much more vulnerable. And I may not get this exactly right, but I believe around $100 million of the wage tax each year comes from federal government employees. And so there's a real vulnerability for us that we haven't had in the past, and that's something that we're looking at and concerned about. And then PICA just did a report looking at the precision of our revenue estimates over the past 20 years. Some of them have been, really close on the nose, our wage tax, our real estate, but we do have some other taxes that are incredibly volatile that Rob and Sabrina already spoke about today, the business income and receipts tax and the realty transfer tax. The amusement tax is also pretty volatile, but it tends to depend on how good the teams are and whether or not we get into the playoffs. So if you can control that, that'd be super helpful for the revenue projections.
Yeah, I'm looking for, what is it called? Not a three-peat, two-peat. So, okay. Back to back. The chair recognizes Councilman Anthony Phillips.
Thank you, Council President. All about the two-peat. I just want to ask, you mentioned in your testimony that setting aside more reserves, whether in the fund balance, budget stabilization reserve, or other reserves, is not without drawbacks. And you mentioned that it's important that we put more into the reserves. It would be very prudent. Do you have a dollar amount of how much should be in the reserves every single year?
So, as I said, PICA by law is simply looking for a positive fund balance. So, but we do recommend looking to things like the GFOA, which would right now be in the neighborhood of about $1 billion. So about twice what the city is projecting for its fund balance this year.
So you can't necessarily recommend anything that would make
Well,
sense?
we recommend aiming towards that GFOA level of around 17%, but by law, we're not going to hold up the city's financial plan because the state law says it should be positive, but we recommend looking to that 17%, which right now is about $1 billion, and is in line with what other jurisdictions do. I know it may say, we've gotten used to having much thinner fund balances in Philadelphia, but that's not normal.
So that's why, I understand that $1 billion is like the goal, right? But we're not going to meet that goal. But it's like, I just was curious, like, who would be responsible?
So,
but give us a sense of like, what can we do that would be just as grand?
So one of the things we'll be looking for when we look at the FY 26 to 30 plan when it comes out next month is the city even hitting its internal goal of 6 to 8% in each year of the plan. So that's another, like, if you think that getting to the, $17 billion within the next 5 years is too much of a stretch, another sort of level that we'll be looking at is the city hitting that at least 6 to 8% target in each year of the plan.
Okay. And then also, have you looked at other cities that are doing well with their reserve balance, or cities that have come out of a circumstance similar to what we're going through right now that we should potentially model? Yeah,
so there are a number of cities that, and it's funny, there's, no two cities are exactly alike, but we do keep an eye, and PICA has in the past benchmarked against other cities. We probably will within the next year. But looking at cities like Las Vegas, you might think those are gamblers. They're not willing to have a lot of money, set aside. No, they have over 20%. A number of cities legislate and, say that there must be at least a 10% fund balance. Washington, D.C. has, and obviously their structure is very different, but they have very significant reserves. And so there are places that we can look to that, the demographics are somewhat similar, conditions are always a little bit different, but it's something we can also get back to you with is just looking at where are other cities right now, and how does Philadelphia stack up, so that's something we can certainly look into.
Yeah, that would certainly be very helpful. Yeah, that would be beyond helpful. And I just really curious about how do we get the right dollar amount, right? Because right now, Rob is kind of like overseeing all of it, right? And like, do we need to make sure we get other people involved, right? To make sure that we're at the right dollar amount, because we just want to get this all right. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Member Phillips. Councilman Kathleen Gilmore Richardson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Marissa, I wanted to just go back to the part where you mentioned the impact of the job loss in the federal government for people who work here in Philadelphia around the wage tax. And you said in total, for all of our federal employees, it's around $100 million in wage tax that comes to the city. And what is PICA's thinking around the impact that could have on our budget?
So, there's so much uncertainty right now. So knowing what the scale is going to be is hard to predict.
You don't know what you don't know right now.
And so, if all of us wish we had a crystal ball and knew how this would shake out, as we talked to colleagues in other cities, turn to our professional organizations that, look nationally. But there may be hard challenges ahead, but we don't know yet what those are going to be. And, one of the nice things about being at PICA is, we're concerned with the fiscal stability, but obviously it is the elected leaders. We don't substitute our wisdom for the policy choices and decisions in those places. But we are happy to provide as much analysis and support as you guys navigate upcoming challenges as we can to you.
Sure, I would love to keep up with the federal trend. We actually had a constituent reach out to our office yesterday looking for assistance who was just let go from SSA. So I would love to continue to receive the outside PICA analysis regarding this issue in particular. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Majority Leader. Are there any other questions from members of the committee? Marissa, as always, thank you for your
Thank you so
hard work and your dedication. Welcome back to City Council. And with that being said, if there are no other questions, comments, or witnesses for this committee, this concludes the hearing on resolution number 240866. And I want to sincerely thank everybody for taking time out of your schedule and being here at this hearing. Thank you very much.